The Persian Gulf, 1987. Iranian gunboats are attacking oil tankers almost every week. Ships are burning. Crews are dying. The world's most powerful navy is watching from a distance. And people are asking the obvious question, why won't the United States Navy just escort these tankers? The US had aircraft carriers in the region. It had destroyers, frigates, and submarines. It had the most lethal surface fleet in human history. One tanker, sailing through one strait, should have been the easiest protection mission ever designed. But here's what nobody tells you. The Navy did eventually escort tankers under Operation Earnest Will, the largest convoy operation since World War II. And what they discovered changed how the entire American military thinks about escort missions, threat geometry, and the real cost of protection. Because the problem was never whether the Navy could escort a tanker. The problem was what that commitment actually costs. And why, even today, in a completely different era, with completely different technology, the US Navy is still reluctant to make that guarantee. The answer is not cowardice. It is not politics. It is math. This is exactly what Navy reality is about, cutting through the noise and getting to the real strategy behind the headlines. If that's what you're here for, subscribe now. Because this is just the beginning. If you're someone who wants to understand how real military decisions actually get made, not the headlines, not the talking points, stay with this. Because this one goes deep. Let's set the theater first. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Every single day, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the world's entire oil supply moves through that channel. Tankers the length of skyscrapers, riding low in the water, carrying millions of barrels of crude, moving at 14 knots. 14 knots is roughly 16 miles per hour. These are not agile platforms. They cannot maneuver quickly. They cannot accelerate. They cannot shoot back. And they have to follow predictable traffic lanes because the water depth on either side of the shipping channel is simply too shallow for their draft. Think about that for a moment. Every tanker moving through Hormuz is, by physical necessity, a slow, enormous, predictable target following a known path. There is no rerouting. There is no deception. There is no speed advantage. The geometry is fixed. Now add Iran to the equation. Iran sits directly on the northern coastline of the strait. Its territory overlooks the entire channel. It has land-based anti-ship missiles on those shores. It has fast attack boats that can be launched in minutes. It has sea mines that require almost no maintenance and cost almost nothing. And it has an asymmetric doctrine built over 40 years specifically around this geography. Iran's strategy has never been to challenge the US Navy in an open battle. That would be suicidal, and they know it. Iran's strategy is simpler. Make the strait dangerous enough that using it becomes economically painful for everyone. You don't need to sink a carrier. You need to raise insurance rates. You need to force tanker captains to hesitate. You need to create just enough uncertainty that oil markets spike, shipping costs climb, and the political pressure lands on Washington instead of Tehran. Now bring the US Navy into this. Here's where the obvious solution starts to break down. The instinct is straightforward. Assign a warship to each tanker. Put a destroyer alongside every vessel that transits the strait. Problem solved. Except run the math. On any given day, there are roughly 50 to 60 commercial vessels of various kinds moving through or near the Hormuz corridor. That is not 50 to 60 escort missions you can schedule neatly on a calendar. Traffic is continuous, overlapping, and unpredictable in timing. Some tankers need 8 hours to transit the danger zone. Some get delayed by weather. Some have mechanical problems. So you cannot assign one ship per tanker in any clean, rotating fashion. You need multiple escorts per ship if the threat is serious, because a single warship, watching a massive tanker in narrow waters, is itself vulnerable to the exact same fast boat-sworn tactics that threaten the tanker. The escort needs backup, which means you need more ships. Now count the US Navy's surface combatants available in the region at any given time. It is not an unlimited number. The Navy operates on deployment cycles. Ships require maintenance. Crews require rest. A destroyer that has been at sea for 6 months in high-threat conditions is not at peak readiness, and every military professional knows what happens when you push equipment and people beyond their operational limits. And this is before you factor in what happens if Iran decides to escalate. Here is the real problem that nobody wants to say out loud. An escort mission does not just protect, it commits. The moment you put a US warship alongside a tanker, you have made a promise. You have told the world that this ship, on this voyage, is under American protection. Which means if Iran strikes it anyway, If a mine hits that tanker while your destroyer is 200 meters away, you are not just facing a shipping incident. You are facing a decision. Do you respond? How hard? With what authority? What happens next? An escort is not a shield. An escort is a tripwire. And in geopolitics, tripwires only work if the other side believes you will actually pull the trigger when they cross it. This is the equation that 1987 taught and that every administration since has quietly understood. Every individual escort mission you accept, you are either creating a credible deterrent or you are creating an obligation you may not be able to fulfill. And if you cannot fulfill it, if the political will does not match the military commitment, you have just taught your adversary that your tripwires are fake. That is more dangerous than having no tripwire at all. So what did the Navy actually do in 1987? And why does it matter today? Operation Earnest Will. 11 Kuwaiti tankers were reflagged as American vessels, which gave the U.S. legal authority to protect them under American law. The Navy then ran those specific ships in coordinated convoys, not every tanker in the Gulf, but a defined, limited set. That is the first lesson. Commitment requires limitation. You do not say you will protect all tankers. You designate which tankers you will protect, under what legal framework, at what cost, and for what defined period. You draw the line clearly so the enemy knows exactly where it is. Even then, it went wrong almost immediately. The tanker MV Bridgeton hit an Iranian mine on the very first convoy. The ship was too large to sink from the strike, but the psychological damage was immediate. Here was the U.S. Navy, with all its power, escorting a vessel on a mine laid weeks or months earlier, had just done exactly what Iran needed it to do. The Navy had no dedicated minesweepers in theater. They had to fly them in from the continental United States. They had to borrow assets from allies. And in the meantime, the largest escort operation in 40 years was being slowed by weapons that cost a few $1,000s each, dropped quietly into the water by a small boat at night. This is not a story about the U.S. Navy failing. This is a story about how asymmetric warfare is specifically designed to exploit the gap between conventional strength and operational logistics. Fast forward to today. The threat environment in Hormuz is meaningfully more complicated than 1987. Iran's military has spent 4 decades learning from those early interactions. They now operate anti-ship ballistic missiles, not just coastal cruise missiles. Ballistic missiles are harder to intercept because they come down at steep angles, fast, and require different defensive systems than flat trajectory cruise missiles. They have drone boats, unmanned surface vehicles that are cheap, expendable, and can swarm a warship in ways that saturate its close-in defense systems. A single warship has a finite number of missiles and guns. A swarm of 40 drone boats launched simultaneously is a different kind of map, and they still have mines, thousands of them. Iran has stated publicly in military doctrine and in military exercises that mining the strait is one of their primary escalation tools. Now think about what it would take to fully escort tanker traffic through this environment today. You would need surface combatants. You would need minesweepers operating ahead of each convoy. You would need air cover against ballistic missile threats, which means either a carrier air wing or land-based interceptors in range. You would need signals intelligence to detect boat movements before they become attacks. You would need submarine presence to manage underwater threats. For a single tanker, one transit 8 hours. You are now talking about a task group, multiple ships, aircraft, intelligence assets, all of them exposed in a constrained geographic space where the enemy's land-based weapons have significant range advantage. Run the cost exchange. A tanker carries cargo worth tens of millions of dollars. The military assets required to defend it exposed to risk. Over a single transit, their replacement cost runs into billions. Even if nothing goes wrong, the operating cost of maintaining that kind of coverage, sustained over months, is extraordinary. And if something does go wrong, if Iran decides that this is the moment to test the commitment, you are not losing a destroyer because the ship is destroyed. You are losing the strategic clarity that the commitment was supposed to create. This is why the phrase, "Why will they just escort tankers?" misses the entire structure of the problem. The Navy can escort tankers. That was never the question. The question is what you are building when you do it. Are you building deterrence or are you building detenancy? Are you creating a sustainable defensive posture or are you deploying finite assets into an environment where the attacker sets the timing, the location, and the cost of each engagement? In Hormuz, the defender does not choose when the mine is laid. The mine was already there. The defender does not choose when the fast boats launch. They launch when Iran decides the moment is right. The defender has to be ready everywhere all the time. The attacker only has to be ready once. That asymmetry is structural. It does not go away with more ships or better technology. It is baked into the geography and the strategic logic. The real American strategy, the one that actually drives decisions, is not about escorting individual tankers. It is about maintaining the credible threat of total naval dominance in the region, combined with the political and economic pressure required to make using Hormuz as a weapon more costly to Iran than keeping it open. The U.S. Navy's presence in the Gulf is not an escort force. It is a strategic ceiling. The message is not, "We will protect every ship." The message is, if you close this strait, you will face consequences that end your naval capability entirely. That threat is credible. Iran knows what American air power did to the Iraqi military in 1991. They know what Tomahawk missiles can reach in one night. The deterrence is real, but it only works if you do not dilute it by making promises you cannot universally keep. Every tanker you escort is a commitment. Every commitment you cannot enforce is a weakness. So the strategy, deliberately and rationally, keeps the commitment broad and the individual obligations undefined. It is not indifference, it is calculated ambiguity. And calculated ambiguity has kept Hormuz open, chaotic at times, dangerous always, but open for decades. Here is where the equation still has an unresolved variable. Drone technology, autonomous systems, and AI-assisted targeting are changing the cost structure on both sides of this problem. Iran can now field drone swarms that cost almost nothing per unit and require minimal skilled crews to operate. The U.S. is investing in counter-drone systems and autonomous minesweeping vessels that reduce the human risk of clearing a path through mined water. If autonomous escort platforms become real, if a task group can be partially crewed by unmanned surface vessels coordinated by a single command ship, then the cost exchange changes. You can put more assets in danger without putting more people in danger. The strategic arithmetic shifts. But that technology is not here yet at operational scale. And in the meantime, the decision calculus remains what it has always been. The U.S. Navy is the most powerful maritime force in history. And precisely because it knows what it costs to use that power correctly, it is extraordinarily careful about when and where it writes checks that history will have to cash. The tankers keep moving through Hormuz. Most of them make it. If this kind of analysis is what you've been looking for, Navy reality is where you need to be. Subscribe, hit the bell, and don't miss what's coming next. And the question that nobody has answered yet, the one that the next crisis will force into the open, is what happens the day Iran decides that one tanker, one convoy, one very public moment is worth the response it will generate. When that day comes, the math that has held for 40 years will have to be run again, and this time, the answer may not be the same.